I would say that it really depends on where things go from here and the extreme interest of, the traditional financial system and the US government, which the ideology of Bitcoin was opposed originally to working with those two entities and sought to, supplant them because, they are bad. That kind of is the original part of the original Bitcoin ethos that has been sort of shed in favor of mass adoption and the idea that holders of Bitcoin will become extremely wealthy.
Only a few years ago, Bitcoin, the world's oldest and largest cryptocurrency, was celebrated for its permissionless, censorship-resistance, and anti-traditional finance nature. The cryptocurrency and some of the thousands of others that have come after it were presumably created to celebrate decentralization, financial sovereignty, and resistance to centralized control, an antithesis of everything the traditional financial industry glorifies. Today, the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency industry has welcomed the traditional finance industry with open arms, ironically going against everything it previously celebrated. Yet, either by design or accident, Bitcoiners are unaware of this incursion and what it would mean for the industry's future. In a recent interview, popular investigative journalist Whitney Webb reveals how Bitcoiners are foolishly allowing the number go up narrative to overshadow Bitcoin's original ethos. As long as prices are rising steadily, they do not have to worry about why BlackRock, one of the world's largest traditional finance institutions, is suddenly pro-Bitcoin and against its own original ideals. Bitcoin was initially positioned as an alternative to the traditional financial system, providing users with censorship-resistant, decentralized money. However, as Wall Street firms, BlackRock, and even the US government have started embracing Bitcoin through ETFs and regulatory approvals, the focus has shifted toward price appreciation and mainstream adoption rather than decentralization. The US government and financial elites were historically skeptical or outright hostile toward Bitcoin. Now, with increasing adoption by institutional investors, Whitney suggests that Bitcoin is being integrated into the existing financial system rather than disrupting it. She fears that government regulation and corporate control could centralize control over Bitcoin, undermining its permissionless nature. Whitney has suggested that governments and financial elites might be strategically embracing Bitcoin to ensure that, instead of being a tool of financial independence, it becomes a speculative asset controlled within the traditional system. We will present clips from Whitney's recent interview with Tom Bilyeu. But before we do, please like and share this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notifications bell. We also love to hear from our viewers and subscribers. So, ensure you join the conversation by dropping your comments and observations in the comments below. We appreciate the support and hope you enjoy the video.
Well, I think it depends on your perspective about Bitcoin. I think a lot of people have, including in the Bitcoin space, have become very obsessed with the number go up mentality and are not really interested in the ideology that helped popularize it among certain demographics. I think my interest in Bitcoin, it's the only cryptocurrency that I see as really having any value. I mean, don't mean to swear, but everything else to me is pretty much a shit coin. I would say that it really depends on where things go from here and the extreme interest of, the traditional financial system and the US government, which the ideology of Bitcoin was opposed originally to working with those two entities and sought to, supplant them because, they are bad. That kind of is the original part of the original Bitcoin ethos that has been sort of shed in favor of mass adoption and the idea that holders of Bitcoin will become extremely wealthy, and the concern and the idea about having freedom money or privacy money and all of that has sort of definitely taken a back burner and may disappear entirely from the discourse. And I personally don't see that as positive. I think if we're going to move into the digital money space and there's this push to eliminate cash, I think anonymity and privacy is important. The argument is that, well, bad people will use it to money launder and all of this stuff. And sure, that's true. But even if we go into a new digital system, I really doubt that the CIA and some of these other entities that engage in that same type of behavior will be forced to stop. I think it'll be money laundering for me and not for thee kind of thing. And also a lot of people that use those, privacy enhancing protocols and products aren't money launderers. They just don't like mass surveillance, which again was part of the, early ideology common among people in the Bitcoin space. And so, the idea that there was this that it was going to challenge fiat and bring more financial fairness to the world and our debt-based monetary system and put us on a hard money standard. And all of this, a lot of that has sort of gone out of the window. And the idea of, Bitcoin, sort of use it as a new petrodollar analog. You want to play with Bitcoin, you need dollars to get access to it. Essentially, this is sort of the theory of my colleague Mark Goodwin, who wrote the Bitcoin dollar, that I would really recommend for anyone that wants to see what's happening now, having been written about like 3 years ago by somebody. This is something that I think is very likely to happen. And I think, people that hold Bitcoin, that care about that ethos still, need to think about, if their bags get pumped, what will they do with that money to preserve financial freedom? Because I don't think the U.S. government or, BlackRock or some of these other entities that have become very bullish on Bitcoin are interested in protecting privacy or having Bitcoin be used for freedom money necessarily. And so I think that stuff personally to me matters, and is one of the reasons that I've tried to speak to people in the Bitcoin space for some time, because I think a lot of those people do care about the ethos, but I think there is sort of an effort to flood the zone, with you will, with this idea that it doesn't matter anymore, and that we should sort of surrender that ethos in favor of becoming extremely wealthy. And that is going to be persuasive for a lot of people, especially when we're potentially facing a debt crisis and an economic downturn. And historically, that type of drastic wealth increase for people can be very persuasive and getting them to change their ideology. But I would argue that, the direction the world is going, it's important to think about what we can do to preserve freedom. And, if you're expecting to have a major increase in your ability to finance things, maybe consider financing things that help ensure privacy and help ensure financial freedom, and ensure that Bitcoin could become freedom money and not just a strategic asset for a few very powerful people.
In a tweet from April 2024, a few months after BlackRock's successful incursion into the Bitcoin space through its spot Bitcoin exchange-traded fund, IBIT, Whitney warned that BlackRock's CEO Larry Fink and other powerful elites were trying to make Bitcoin part of the programmable surveillance digital money ecosystem, which has frequently been celebrated as the next phase of the global monetary system. There's a war on financial privacy, Whitney warned. It will not magically stop because you hold some Bitcoin and number go up. Larry Fink and his cronies want to make Bitcoin part of the programmable surveillance digital money ecosystem, and they are winning right now. If your Bitcoin heroes are telling you to submit to the state, comply harder, and that everything will be fine because you might get rich if you let criminal bankers mold Bitcoin into their plaything, find new heroes. Complying with tyranny for the promise of wealth makes you a banker stooge. Banker stooge is exactly what the Bitcoin community is slowly turning into, and someday soon, the industry will become completely unrecognizable. And it's not just Bitcoin. In her interview, Whitney warns about stable coins like Tether, which she says will be used to create a centrally controlled digital dollar system headed and controlled by bankers like Jamie Dimon and Fink. Let's get back to Whitney's interview.
And looking at an entity like Tether, I have argued in a series I co-wrote with my colleague Mark Goodwin called The Chain, that you can find on my website, Unlimited Hangout, that one of the co-founders of Tether and some of the other people involved in early Tether appear to have significant intelligence ties. Some of them, like Brock Pierce, have ties to pedophilia scandals that happened in the early 2000s. Tether since then has come under fire for being not transparent about its reserves, among other things. And it has also been memory hold its role in the FTX scandal, where you had Alameda Research being very involved with, the tether supply and helping it maintain its peg, among other things. And if we, of course, know now that FTX was involved in all sorts of financial misconduct, for lack of a better word.
To put it nicely.
Yeah. Yes. And, Solana, which has been responsible for these pump and dump meme coins, among other things, was also very closely tied to Sam Bankman-Fried. He's been called one of the main reasons behind its rise in popularity, for what it since has become. And there's no shortage of examples of sort of pump and dump meme coins that have sort of rugged people of a lot of money, and what has that money ultimately led to, and who was ultimately responsible for that pump and dump rug pull, wealth transfer, arguably, type of operation. It definitely would facilitate this type of bad behavior that we know intelligence agencies have engaged in with the past, like the BCCI example. It would definitely facilitate that. And the fact that you have these types of connections there, I think is certainly worthy of examination. And Tether notably has a lot of the same rhetoric that BCCI once used, the idea of, banking the unbanked, for example. But they're very willing to seize people's money on behalf of the U.S. Treasury. And Paolo Ardoino, who is the head of Tether now, has said that Tether is fully committed to expanding U.S. dollar hegemony globally, and has, onboarded the FBI and Secret Service on that platform, on their platform. That essentially makes it a digital arm, you could argue, of the U.S. government. And when you also consider this military manual that was published by WikiLeaks, well over a decade ago, they referred to, basically the dollar and some of these style of financial institutions that help propagate it globally, particularly in the global South, as sort of financial weapons of U.S. empire. And it's very possible, and I think, I think an argument can clearly be made that Tether is sort of facilitating that, specifically in economies that have become unstable or have very unstable currencies. And some of that is partly due to U.S. sanctions. Some of it is due to these entities that have been called financial weapons of U.S. empire, like the IMF and the World Bank. And then their currencies are unstable. They're covered in, they're trapped in this debt slavery model, which is a big reason for in many cases, for a lot of the economic instability, and people are being onboarded onto the digital dollar, onto Tether, as a way to be able to preserve their wealth. But ultimately, it's kind of a way to globalize the dollar and covertly dollarize a country without formally dollarizing it, in the way that places like Ecuador and El Salvador were formally dollarized. And if you consider the outsized role, including in the digital asset space, and sort of its formation and the infrastructure for it, of some of these currency speculators, and the role of currency speculators in the past, we can point to in the 90s, George Soros, or arguably people like, Jeffrey Epstein, if you're familiar with my work, having a role in, crushing local currencies. If that were to happen today, and there's no reason to think that type of currency speculation like, Soros style in 92, for example, doesn't happen today, I'm sure it does, then the end result could easily be people just sort of onboarding to the dollar, particularly a form of the dollar that is surveillable, seizable, and ultimately programmable. And those were the same concerns that a lot of Americans have had about central bank digital currencies. It's not necessarily that the money would be issued by the central bank, because money is issued by the central bank now. Right? It's about the concern that it presents to liberty, because it's surveillable, programmable, and seizable. And I think Tether checks all of those boxes, ultimately. And really, any sort of digital dollar that the U.S. ultimately approves, which is very likely in the Trump administration, at his speech at the Bitcoin conference last year, said no CBDCs, but was very bullish on stablecoins, on dollar stablecoins, which are a major purchaser of U.S. treasuries, for example, and help service the U.S. debt. And if you combine that with a lot of his bullishness on Bitcoin, the talks of a strategic Bitcoin reserve, for example, I think it's very possible that we could see this type of digital dollar paradigm that Tether really helped start expand. And I don't think there's really a lot of discussions about whether this is good or what the potential origins or intentions of it were or still are, because a lot of people that promote Tether have very rose-tinted glasses about it and parrot this idea of banking the unbanked and sort of ignore the FBI Secret Service connection, the fact that they've seized people's money when the U.S. Treasury Department has asked them to do that, even if they're not U.S. citizens, and this type of stuff. What does this ultimately mean? And I think people that are particularly in the Bitcoin space, which has often been sort of flooded at times with the opinion that Tether is a Bitcoin company, should consider that, especially when a lot of the rhetoric and ideology around Bitcoin was about stopping the debt slavery system and the debt-based monetary system. Do people really want to perpetuate that? And is it really conducive to financial freedom and banking the unbanked in a way that is good for liberty?
In a lengthy tweet she put out recently, Whitney provides more detail about why the US government and global elites are suddenly so interested in Bitcoin and crypto. The tweet reads, "The biggest banks and a cadre of spooky currency speculators have funded and now control most of the infrastructure underlying Bitcoin with the openly stated goal of having it be only an asset you don't and can't spend. The US government and this small elite faction hold most of the Bitcoin, and once their financial control grid is complete, they inflate its price through the roof." As Catherine Austin Fitts has said of the elite's plans, "Once you steal everything, you want to move to a disinflationary system. These elites, who have a lot of ties to the Epstein network, hold so much Bitcoin collectively, and when currencies implode, pumping gold and silver, etc., instead would make too many other actors, including other governments like China and Russia, very wealthy, while pumping Bitcoin will make only a specific, largely US-based cabal very wealthy. When they collapse currencies, they will buy up everything they didn't manage to buy up during COVID, and then install their new and beyond Orwellian financial surveillance grid in place, using Bitcoin as a reserve asset. The US government, Silicon Valley, and Wall Street bankers, who have economically and sometimes militarily waged war against much of the world, are using Bitcoin for this and are buying up media influence to manufacture consent. As a consequence of the purchase of Bitcoin media, most Bitcoiners, instead of being up in arms about it and putting momentum behind any potential workaround, are spending time shilling Tether and explaining away their overt partnership with the US national security state, shills for dollarized debt posing as anti-state and anti-bank. There's a lot happening behind the scenes that isn't openly discussed, and history has shown that governments aren't always forthcoming with the truth. Whether or not you agree with investigative journalists like Whitney Webb, it's crucial to question official narratives and conduct your own research into these pressing issues. The stakes couldn't be higher. Webb's warnings about Bitcoin, stablecoins, and artificial intelligence raise concerns that could shape the future of finance, privacy, and even global power structures. Are these fears justified? Should we be paying closer attention to the potential risks? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you found this discussion valuable, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated on our latest content. Thanks for watching.